All right, I'm here today with David DeMesquita. Am I saying that correctly?
Yeah, close enough. DeMesquita. Yep.
Or DeMesquita or Dynamite D.
Hola, bienvenido de nuevo a otro episodio de Tack Bodybuilding. Antes de que empecemos, por favor suscríbete a mi canal y dale like al video. Gracias.
I'm happy to have you on, man. I've been following you for quite some time. How you doing?
I'm doing good, man. I'm happy to be on here. And I think we started really vibing together after the whole cat situation, actually.
The Mr. Aioli, a cat abuser.
Dude, so the unfortunate part about it is I did a skit about like the I'm a fitness influencer skit. That was part of the skit, but for some reason the video recording, it didn't pick up on my voice. So we had to re-record it, and then I was like, if we drop that line in there now, it's going to be so out of pocket, it's going to sound bad.
Yeah. That's crazy. What a fucking coincidence. Yeah, that guy, I think that guy's fine now, obviously. Dude, whole situation was insane, the amount of people that were defending that guy over that.
I don't understand how you can defend anyone who is abusing something that has no control over its own life. Like, their life is in your hands, and you're choosing to abuse whatever that is.
Dude,
anything.
Yeah. Dude, I mean, yeah, and it's like not even that, obviously that, but the fact that you recorded it and then uploaded it too. It's like, what the fuck? That was a good idea.
Yeah, brilliant idea.
Yeah, and I don't know. I guess over in that country, I don't know what it is, because I saw people on both sides defending, saying fucking we don't support him, but all the people that were supporting him were from Mexico, and I don't know what it is, because you see this too in not like bodybuilding in the industry, where guys will do something fucked up from a foreign country, and that country like praises that person, and that doesn't happen in America. Like, if Chris Bumstead did something fucked up, I don't think so many people would be like, oh well, like he's our daddy. Like you saw with Hadi, and the whole country is like, I don't know why they can't comprehend what is a bad decision. It's just they defend the guy no matter what.
I was one of the first places to post the Hadi situation, and this was the most interesting one, and this is not a dock against this man, but one person defending him was Adam from Elite Physiques. He commented on my post, well, he's deaf, he definitely couldn't know, and I'm like, Adam, how many times have you had an Olympian on stage? How many expert editors trying to get that man back on stage, because he probably can't hear that well? It's like, and then people were threatening me. They're like, how could you paint him to be a bad person? I'm like, I'm not painting him to be a bad person. I'm just saying, look, we're hormonal men on stage depleted down to an oblivion. Anyone that understands bodybuilding understands that. But this is respect, and we love each other up there. We're supposed to have love for each other because we're all going through the same process, and it's not a fun process to go through. Let's be honest. We have to genuinely love what we're doing to deplete ourselves down and to take away, I don't want to say sacrifices, but every door has an equal and opposite reaction, right? But we close a lot of doors because of the energy depletion that we go through, and those are our brothers on stage at the end of the day. That's sportsmanship. Any other sport, you shake hands at the end of the game. So
it doesn't happen in bodybuilding oftentimes. At least a lot of these guys, they have vendettas against each other. Everybody's got beef, even if it's not publicly said. A lot of these guys, you can just see it just in the way they present themselves.
Yeah, I think that is mainly in men's bikini a little bit more than other categories. But
yeah. I remember. I'm not even gonna talk about it, but I remember seeing some crazy shit, a few years back. Now, post it on the stories, I'll fuck you up. These guys. Did you ever see that movie, The Perfect Physique? Do you remember that?
No.
It's with Sadiq Buendia, Greg Plitt's in it, Poston. It's fucking.
The OGs.
It's really cheesy, but there's some funny scenes in there. I definitely check it out. But yeah, I don't know why other countries do that. I don't know what it is. If it's like, is that your cat?
That's my cat. One of them.
Oh shit. That's not a Bengal.
So it's a Seal Lynx Bengal. Yeah, it's brother and sister actually.
Oh wow, yeah, they're crazy.
I need a cat dad hat after seeing yours. I don't know.
Everybody asked me where I got it. I got it in Lahaina, literally right before it burnt down, so it's gone now.
Oh no!
And down in Maui in Hawaii.
Well, at least that's historical memorabilia now.
Pretty much, it's a history now, but I don't know why those guys do that in other countries. I think it's almost like we have so much shit going on in America and maybe in other countries where they see somebody get clout in the fitness industry or go far in bodybuilding, it's like that represents this country now. Like that's us. It's a much bigger deal, and they don't want that. They feel attacked when that person gets attacked. That's how I seem to interpret it, at least.
Yeah, and that's an understanding. That's you know, I hate to say it like this, but that's patriotism we don't commonly see anymore in the U.S. I remember the Olympics being a much bigger deal in the U.S. and the patriotism that it brought with it. And then this was, what, 2 years ago or so? Like, if you had an American flag, you were a conservative extremist. It's like, what? That's an American flag. What are you talking about right now? It's like, that's not patriotism. It doesn't matter, like, what side of the fence you believe in or political beliefs. I feel like that has become, unfortunately, a thing that I've seen, at least in the U.S., and it's probably put out there into the news outlets because they always go for extremes because that's what people are going to view. However, I saw it in person too, which is kind of weird, but it is what it is. And I live in Georgia, man.
Yeah. Where is Georgia?
I am just north of the city, about like 45 minutes north of it.
Okay. Have you always been down there?
Yeah, born and raised.
Oh, I only drove through it. Seems kind of nice though, over there in what's the city? Atlanta? Yeah.
Yeah. Just I like north of the city a little bit more than the actual city itself. But the city itself has been gentrified a lot. A lot of IT companies came down here because they offered some tax write-offs. So you have like Microsoft HQ down here, and I used to be in IT. So like my first job was corporate Coca-Cola out of school. So like I've been at like Fortune 50 companies and stuff before I went into coaching full time. And the reason why I went into coaching full time is when John Meadows passed away, felt like a father to me. I mean, pretty sure he felt like a father to like all of us, but he was mentoring me. And, you know, when he passed away, it felt like there was a lot of light in the fitness industry that was coming from him. And I was like, you know what? I was like, it's time. I was like, I have a name in the fitness industry. I'm going to step away from IT and I'm going to do this full time. But yeah. So
okay, so that's when you started coaching. It was after Meadows passed away. So this is what, 2018, 2019?
Yeah. So that was 2021. I think is when he passed officially. It was like
is that when he passed?
Yeah, because it was right after the Chicago Pro in Atlanta because he was hanging out with us.
I thought it was way further than that. Maybe I'm thinking Rich Piana.
No, Rich Piana was a few years before that. That was 2019, I think, was Rich Piana because it was before the whole, and I'm going to say C19 because I know how this works, situation happened.
I think that was even further than that. I think I was still in high school. I might have been when he died.
Rich?
Yeah, I think it was like 2017. It was a while back.
Yeah, I graduated from college 2015. It was a few years after college. I remember when it happened because 5% was blowing up.
Yeah.
I was like,
no. That was everything changed after that. I think that's a part of the industry died with Rich.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, because I mean, you had bigger by the day and leaner by the day, and these crazy cycles that didn't make sense at all. But you know, hey,
it was just that hardcore bodybuilding mentality. But for anybody watching who doesn't really know who you are, just give us like a quick background on you. You said you were in IT. You started coaching after Meadows passed away, so a few years back. You know, how did you really get into bodybuilding, any of this in the first place?
Well, so the funny thing is I was coaching for like years behind the scenes before John passed away. Like I was helping some Olympians and stuff like that, who are actually like #1 in the world now. For like years before that, it was just like, I hate to say it, but we'll get into like kind of the dark shadow coaching part of the industry in a second. like we're laughing because we know it all too well. But so I got into bodybuilding in 2010. This is when I first went to college, and I was on track to being a pro soccer player, was going to probably play in college, and then I got severely injured my senior year of high school, and I was like, you know what? I was like, this is where my body's ending. Like, I cannot continue with soccer anymore. Like, when you fracture your back from running so much, you know, that's like a tall sign. Played the season on torn meniscus, and then I got my ankle kicked out, and I was like, you know what? I've had 2 surgeries this year. I was like, I don't want a 3rd surgery. I was like, this is the end. I was like, I'll play the rest of the season. I was like, I'm done. So went to school and kind of fell into lifting because the recreational facility that we had down there was stellar, and it was Georgia Southern University, so there wasn't a lot around besides you had a gym and you had alcohol, and I chose the gym instead of alcohol, and that was basically, there's like two other ends of the spectrum. So I went like hardcore into it because I was in a very depressed state. A lot of stuff personally happened in my life, and I dove myself into the gym, and I feel like this is a common story that we hear in bodybuilding. There's a lot of traumatic backgrounds, and a lot of people use the gym as a masking agent, and they go hardcore from one extreme into another extreme, whether it's addiction or whether it's trauma or abuse. And what I realized, and this was probably like 5-6 years down the road, it was towards the end of my college career, that I needed to work through, and I was using it as a masking agent to numb the actual reality and actually being able to feel my emotions again, because I had a lot of trauma that happened, and I used the gym as a tool to mask that. That was my painkiller, was the gym. And once I came to grasp with that, I really truly started to heal. On top of that, what I realized with bodybuilding is bodybuilding doesn't have to be a super extreme. There is a very happy medium. Now, don't get me wrong. When you're getting ready for a show, 4 weeks out from a show, 6 weeks out from a show, you're not going out with your friends. You don't have the energy for that. But that's a very short period of time. But there's a very sweet balance if you allow yourself to heal and you get in good relationships. I'm talking with your friends, like whether it's like a girlfriend or boyfriend. All those things are super important to understand, that a fundamental root understanding and a need for humans is connection. And people use the gym as an excuse to mask and to never get that connection. So I eventually used bodybuilding as a tool to create balance in my life. It created extremes because I was used to working 80 hours a week, but I was also broke in college, and I was broke out of college. And bodybuilding is an expensive hobby. And yes, I don't care if you're a professional, it's a hobby until you're like top 5 in the world. And then it still can be potentially a hobby because you have to have your own business, or else you're not supporting yourself. I'm sorry. Like, unless you're Chris Bumstead and you have a mustache that's worth like tens of millions of dollars, then you're probably having...
Chris has like 3 businesses.
Exactly. So, and it's not like his mustache built it for him. So, maybe part of it. He'll probably have a mustache line coming out soon. But
his mustache has 50% equity in all business.
Exactly. That's exactly right. So at the end of the day, that's essentially what made me fall into bodybuilding, was a masking agent, and the coaching aspect was I was getting into pharmacology, I was getting into hormones, and I didn't want to be the blind leading the blind, but it was mainly for myself personally. I wanted to understand what I was putting in my body, what steroids I was putting in my body. And the answer was, the information was already available to us. There is nothing groundbreaking that will come out from a steroid standpoint, period. I'm sorry, like, SARMs aren't some magical, mythical being, being litigogs. They're worse than steroids because the selective tissue that I combine to is so small. And there's a reason why I failed all very toxicity tests. And steroids, if it's not testosterone, is a SARM. It's selective to the tissue it wants to bind to. So that is kind of what took me down the rabbit hole of like, how can I get as big as possible without not feeling like crap? And the answer was, there was a happy medium point where there's a point of diminishing return, because the machine, you can only put so much nitric oxide into it before it breaks down. And how long does it break down for? So how can you prevent the breakdown? Is it mathematically better to take 2 steps forward and 1 step back rather than 3 steps forward and 2 steps back? And the answer is always mathematically yes. I'd rather take 2 steps forward and 1 step back over and over again, because I'm getting about a 15-20% more return on my investment over a long period of time, just like financial investments and stuff like that. But I just talked a lot. So that was pretty much my background of how I got into bodybuilding and coaching, was actually pharmacokinetics, and then I self-taught myself medical and functional health, actually, because I started getting sick.
Okay. Now, this is what, back in 2015?
I started into bodybuilding in 2010, and I started studying steroids probably heavily in 2014, which is when I ran my first cycle, was when I was getting ready to graduate college. But I went from 135 pounds to 220 pounds naturally in 2 years.
So I'm confused here because the timeline on this, you started bodybuilding in 2010, but you graduated school in 2015.
Yep.
So you were doing IT from 2015 to 2020-ish.
I was doing IT until 2021. 2021 was my final contract in IT. And I was coaching on the side. So my client load, which I don't like going above this number anyways anymore, it's actually lower usually, is 70 is what I was at. When I was working corporate IT, 50 to 60 hours a week, and I had a client load of 70. And then every person I was putting on a national stage that year was basically going pro. I think at the end of the year, I had a 50% ratio of people stepping on stage and going pro. And I had 2 Olympians on stage in 2021 as well. So people were like, "Oh, the next best thing since sliced bread." I was like, "No." I was like, "Don't hype it up." I was like, "No, I'm not taking on more clients." I was like, "I have no life right now." So the coaching thing happened actually probably in 2016 is when I started to coach actually. And then I kept my client load around like a 5 to 10 kind of thing, and I did it for fun.
Okay, so you started bodybuilding in 2010. How did you what am I saying here? And then you were in school until 2015. You started coaching around that time. I'm just confused because you said you started, what got you into like meeting John Meadows and things, like how did you actually get involved into the industry? Because you were in IT, and you said you were also playing soccer, right? So did you not play soccer in school? You went straight to bodybuilding, or were you playing soccer in college?
No, my final season was my high school season.
Okay.
That's what I was like. I was like, my body's out. I was like, I'm done. I was like, it's not going any further. So I was already in the bodybuilding scene. In 2016, I did the first classic show ever. I was going to do men's physique actually, and I won the overall show. And then I did 2016 nationals, which George the Bull won my class. So we know how that all went. I saw him hit a back double bicep when I walked off stage to watch the finals in the overall. And I was like, I don't know what I was doing on the stage. I was third call-outs out of like 40-something guys. It was a massive showing. And there was only 3 classes. You had class A, B, and C then. And my weight cap, I think, was like 177 or 182, something ridiculously low back then. And like now it's 194. So that was when I started getting deeper into the bodybuilding scene. And then I hired Matt Porter actually as my coach in 2017. Went up to started dating my girlfriend, which now is my wife, back in the end of 2016, 2017. Went up to the Arnold for the first time with Matt Porter working his booth. And that's kind of when I started getting tied in heavier into the scene.
Okay. Matt Porter. I never met Matt Porter. He passed away. I'm pretty sure he used to be friends with Phil. I think Phil's talked about him a lot.
Matt, I think, would have gone down as the best bodybuilding coach of all time by this point. Because he passed away, I think, when he was 32 or 33.
Yeah. Wow. Do you know what he passed away from?
I believe it was a heart attack. They never announced it officially, but it was like from what happened and occurred, it sounded like a heart attack. And he already, I believe, had open heart surgery by that point because he did have a scar down his chest. I don't really like talking about it because I don't want to jump to assumptions, but I believe it was like a heart attack of some sort. And I was actually his last national competitor on stage, and that's when John actually took me on because Terrence and I were both with Matt Porter, and we actually were the only 2 that went from Matt Porter to John Meadows. And he took us on because Matt passed away, and my wife was getting coached by John for 2 years at that point. So he probably took me on only because my wife was with him, to be honest.
Okay, so you worked under John. Did you mentor under him?
So it was just basically phone calls for fun. We nerd out with each other on the phone. You know, I feel like that's the best form of mentorship anyways, is being able to nerd out. Like, just like, hey, like, I ran into something about, like, how can I elicit more of an insulin response so I can shuttle L-carnitine? Like, would growth hormone work in that manner? And because, like, you get a drive of a blood glucose will spike the insulin enough on the back end of it. And, like, it'd be like, that'd be a phone call, right? You know? So it'd be like, just, let's nerd out a little bit.
Yeah, that's always fun. Obviously, you need to have people who actually know what they're talking about to be able to do that, though, which most people don't. I find it interesting. You said that you like to keep your client load around 70, and I would say I stay somewhat around that range too. The highest that I've gone up to is it was a little over 130, and that was an insane amount of fucking work. It's a lot, and it amazes me how I think I don't want to sound like a fucking, like an asshole or some egotistical prick here, but I think I'm sure you are too, a lot more meticulous and detail oriented with my clients. And I like to have a lot of shit nailed down. Like if you see my protocols, like everything is very outlined very thoroughly. And from what I've seen, I don't want to name other people's names, and even people that I've worked with that are, even high level coaches, or everybody's a fucking coach now, TikTok coaches, whatever. And they give the most like simplistic bullshit protocols that I could have wrote when I was 14 years old after reading one bodybuilding.com article. And these guys are charging $600-700 a month, which whatever, you have the fucking traffic, I get it. But like, really, should they be doing that? Probably not. But it's insane to me how people don't see this and see these guys taking on so many people. They're coaching 200 plus people. And it's like, then they become business coaches too. Then they're like, yeah, I'll show you how to make this much money in a month. And like, then what they're really showing though is them making the money from the business coaching aspect, not the actual fitness coaching aspect. It's like this huge scam that's going on in this industry. It's like, there's literally no way that you as one individual, maybe you got a team of people, but as one individual, you cannot efficiently coach 200 fucking people. You cannot do it.
No, so my number that I hit, and it was on accident, I was at 132, and I couldn't figure out, and I didn't run the numbers in a while, right? And I have very good communication and constant communication. It's not just like you check in and you're done. It's like we can have a conversation through the week, it doesn't matter kind of thing. And send me your form videos too, because most people don't develop proper physiques because their form is bad or their intensity is bad. So when I ran that number, I was working from 8 a.m., waking up at 8 a.m., and working till 11:30 or midnight. Some nights, 1 or 2 a.m. in the morning, I was like, oh shoot, I have to wake up at 8 a.m. because I'm going to get behind on my work. And I did this for, I think it was 6 weeks in a row, from Monday until Thursday. Those are my work hours. And I wasn't going to the gym. I literally could not go to the gym. And then eventually when I started traveling for shows, that was my Friday to Sunday burned. And I was like, okay, how many people do I have? And it was like 132. I'm like, I never want to do this again. And I literally killed off contracts. I was like, I can't do this anymore. I was like, one, I'm going to lose the quality that I'm having, which I refuse to do because I'm still executing at a very high percentage of people going pro and doing well on pro stages. I don't want to dilute that. I don't want to dilute my communication. I hate sending a sentence for a long drawn out email of, this person needs some emotional support today. Like, good coaching, you make lives better. I'm sorry. And you cannot, anyone over 100, you've got to be a freak of nature or have no life. You can't leave your house. And there's like one coach that I know that literally doesn't leave his house. And he handles hundreds of clients, but, he doesn't leave his house. And that's what he chooses to do. But yeah. John was a big one, actually. One of the things that he always told me is he actually at one point in time, I believe his max that he ever had was like 220 or 240. And he said it was the worst. He said it was the worst coaching experience I've ever given someone because if people would get 2-word responses if they were lucky, but they would always get their plan back, but they wouldn't get a response. So he only had like 20 to 30 of us probably when he retired. Like he was already retired when he took me on. And that's when I was like, you know what? I was like, you have to actually be so passionate about coaching that you can't care about the money if you want good results to make lives better. And it's not just putting a great athlete on stage. A great athlete will always be a great athlete. They don't even need a great coach, and they're going to be a great athlete. I'm sorry. Like anyone out there that's listening that thinks that like their athlete is mind-blowing because of you, the athlete themselves is wired a certain way, and that will take them to the top. All that you do is you're a guiding hand. That's it. Make sure they don't drive off the road. Yeah.
I think a lot of people don't realize that either, is they see, the best clients being marketed, and it's just, that's like anybody could have fucking done this. Like, I don't want to say anybody, but most of these coaches could have done the same thing, right? And it's insane. I think I've had this experience with specific coaches. I'm sure you can already assume who they are. I'm not going to say any names, where they have a lot of clients, a lot. And guess what? They're not even coaching all of them. They have ghost coaches under them. And, even with the ghost coaches, you're still not getting a response for 2-3 weeks at a time. They're taking off. Sorry, guys, I got a vacation this month. I'm not going to answer for the next month. I'm not saying like you can't take a vacation if you're a coach, like, okay, like this week, give me a break. But when this is a consistent thing every fucking 2-3 months and now I'm going to the show. Just because you're at a show doesn't mean you can't do any check-ins that week. It's just, This is an insane, I'm sure you can already think of who I'm referring to. And some of these guys are seen as the best coaches in this industry. And it's just a fucking illusion.
It's illegal too. That's what people actually don't realize is like if you, as long as in the contract, if there's like phrasing in the contract that is like, I am coaching you, but I'm allowed to have other coaches coach you. That's how they're getting away with it legally. But technically it is illegal if you're selling, if the person just doing sales and they're selling you and another coach is coaching you and that's not written in the contract that that's allowed, then no bueno. Now, there might be phrasing like within teams that allow you to transfer from one coach to another, but you should be notified from a legality standpoint due to the contractual obligation. That's something that I'd be very aware of, because it is illegal. And like, there's not one other industry in this world that I see something like that being done legally, unless if you know what you're signing up for.
Well, these guys don't even know that though, because they'll have people use their name and act like they're still coaching them. I've even seen these guys literally like send over screenshots to their ghost coaches and be like, this is what this guy said, like, can you write out the response or whatever, like just take care of all this stuff. And it's insane. They have no idea. But I mean, obviously I think in the competitive world as bodybuilders, we all understand it's fucked up, but people just aren't aware that it's happening. But now what I also see is just in the fitness side, the regular fitness industry outside of competitive bodybuilding, they're almost trying to normalize this, because you see everybody's trying to become this business coach now, and how can you make 10K a month, 20K a month, whatever, and these guys are making these crazy amounts of money a month, and they're showing people how to do this. But now, again, it comes back to the fact that you cannot officially coach 200 people a month. So then how do we do that? Okay, you need to delegate people and have these VAs do everything for you. And they're normalizing this because now it's just about how can you elevate yourself as a business person and make more money. And it's not actually about being a good fucking coach, because most of these people don't even know anything about fitness to begin with. They shouldn't be coaches. It's just this thing where everybody's hopping on to try to make more money. And they're normalizing ghost coaching as one of those outlets.
And that's like, there's levels to this game, right? Not everyone's a coach, right? That's why some people remain as elementary school coaches versus high school coaches versus NCAA coaches versus NFL coaches, right? Levels to the game. It's like, look, if you're an elementary school coach and you're copying and pasting all this information that's already in preset systems, well, guess what? Like, that's not coaching. They can pay $15 a month. By the way, everyone listening, you can pay $15 a month to get an application to do that automated for you, by the way. And there are good applications out there that would do it. Or B, learn how to calculate your macronutrients. There was Lane Norton, actually. He wrote an article, I think it was in 2014 or 2013 on simplyshredded.com. That's actually the first time I learned how to count macronutrients. And one of my friends got peeled to the bone off of it, just doing his macro calculation.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, I think it's true for the most part that you usually get what you pay for in this industry, but at the same time, that's not always the case. So it's really like, it's a fucking shady industry. It's really hard to know who to trust. And like, unfortunately, in a lot of these cases, like, you really don't even figure that out until you go through it. And you're like, wow, like this is how it really is. Now with your coaching, do you have more competitors or more lifestyle guys? You have a lot of girls.
So it's funny. I'm probably 70% women. And the reason for that is what brought me back into coaching is actually women's hormone health. So it was actually like lifestyle previous competitors, and they couldn't get their menstrual cycles regulated. Some of them were having to get close to getting ablations done and stuff like that. Their fertility issues. All that is what brought me back in. And I was like, I tend to have a gift for healing up women. There are women that haven't had menstrual cycles for like 20, 30 years. And like, well, probably not 30 years. At that point in time, like, you're probably out on the tail end of it. But even 25 years, and menstrual cycles online within like 2 months. And it was like over and over and over again I was doing it. And it was straight functional health. I was like, all right, how can I fix this? How can I do this naturally? Not HRT, which everyone's pushing nowadays. And it's funny because I'm opening my own clinic up and I'm like talking shit about HRT, right? It's like HRT has a place, but it's like, why don't you learn functional health first? Like, why don't you actually learn what a menstrual cycle is? By the way, if you don't know what a menstrual cycle is, you shouldn't be coaching women unless you have a doctor oversighting stuff. I'm so like that's just a blanket statement at this point. But most of my clients are competition clients now. But I did do very, very extreme medical cases within men and women, and very high level athletes as well. And that's actually how I originally built my roster up and got really good athletes. Is all these athletes were ruined. I was like, come on over, I can fix you. I mean, I wasn't saying come from your coach. Like they had to be coachless beforehand or had a good excuse. And it's like, look, like I just need to be healthy again. I'm like, okay, like let's do functional health. Let's fix you. And everyone was getting fixed within 6 months. And they're like, I think I actually want to compete again. Like most of these people had such severe trauma that they weren't ever sure. They just want to like be able to function in a day in the life again, whether it was their adrenals or menstrual cycles from their ovarian to pituitary axis way, and steroids down-regulated everything. Things didn't come back online properly. Thyroid dysfunction, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, like whatever it was. I just wanted to be able to fix them. So I actually did a lot of medical cases. I used to have like 50% medical lifestyle cases. And then even the competitors that I had, it was like 70% of them were actually medical cases that I needed to heal up. And then I got competitors on the back end. I was like, oh, cool. If I fix them, I get a really good competitor on the back end. And it's very beneficial to the two of us because they get to enjoy life again. And then you have to find, hey, you came from a traumatic experience. What is that happy balance with bodybuilding for you? Because now that you're healthy, we're going to keep you healthy. You can still step on stage and be healthy after you step off stage. Now, is competing healthy? No, but what's the healthiest way that we can do this? Because you've got a limited window of time where you can really sacrifice health, and then you need to get things online as quickly as possible. So on that tail end, like for instance, the gut, when you're eating less food, you have less bacteria in your system. That's just the end of story. But if you don't repopulate on the tail end properly, this is why reversing is so important. It's not just like thyroid hormones or sex hormones. It's literally repopulating your gut so that you can still absorb thyroid hormone. Like people don't even talk about that. Your liver is everything. So, yeah.
You know what's insane? This is like kind of off topic, but I don't know if you maybe you have some insight onto this. I did my show. I did nationals back in December, and obviously I was in prep for fucking 16, 20 weeks. My girlfriend obviously wasn't in prep, but you know she doesn't. When I'm in prep, she's not really eating that much. She eats less. Like she's basically like in like somewhat of a prep. She's just very restricted, right? We're not eating junk food. She's like eating less calories. Like she's just eating a lot more cleaner. It's basically just not to the extent that I am. She's doing cardio. After my show, you know, we went out to eat the next day. You know, we got a decent amount of food. It honestly wasn't even like super crazy. I didn't go out of control. I was fine, right? But we weren't used to eating that much. And by the end of the night, we were at a barbecue place called Dickie's. You know Dickie's?
I've heard of it, but I've never had it.
So we're at Dickie's, and this is after like a full day of kind of like eating like shit. And she stood up and literally blacked out, like fainted, like went unconscious to the floor, and we had to call the ER. We don't know what happened. We think it was from like the food, like the influx of food, not being used to that. I don't know how it would have caused that. They were like, oh, maybe she had a heart attack. I was like, she did not just have a fucking heart attack. What the fuck are we talking about? It was crazy, but I feel like it had to do with that. It had something to do with just that influx of food that she was not used to eating. I don't know if you have any insight as to what could possibly contribute to that.
Yeah, so let's dive into the rabbit hole here really fast. Now, there's some interesting stuff that happens in the gut that really people don't talk about, right? So one, there's an influx of food. So that alone can put a lot of pressure on the body. The stomach is probably shrank up at that point. That could put pressure on the stomach, and it might not digest as quickly. The thyroid also would downregulate naturally because of eating less food. So the motility actually slows down of the entire gastrointestinal system. So then when it comes down into the intestines are responsible for the majority of our dopamine and serotonin production. So what happens if our gut's in a bad spot before we even diet it down, and then we go to repopulate the gut with a bunch of sugar, and we ferment a bunch of bacteria. And maybe the intestinal lining isn't in a good spot at that moment in time. Well, the intestines are responsible for recirculating not only good things, but bad things too, and toxins. So what happens if we have something like leaky gut and the intestinal permeability is higher than it should be, and there's an enzyme called beta-glucuronidase that's too high, we start repopulating and recirculating some toxins through the body. Well, you're talking about systemic inflammation. You're probably driving up angiotensin at that point, or maybe even aldosterone, and just the pressure. Maybe it was arrhythmia, right? Maybe that would probably cause a blackout very easily when the circulation isn't able to handle all that at that moment in time. That is a super extreme situation. So I'm like just going down a rabbit hole of like potentiations of like things that could potentially happen. It could have been dopamine affecting neurotransmitters in the brain because the gut's responsible for that. It could have been a lot of things, but I would probably lean into the extra inflammation from fermentation in the gut because obviously Dickie's high in sugar is driving up so much bacteria that it's just creating some inflammation in the actual body. And then you're probably getting a rise in potentially angiotensin, and is creating just a lot of pressure on the heart from this. Also, the sodium too from it, which is a massive thing, and just holding extra water retention in the cells. And that's probably what happened most likely.
I know.
Not a heart attack.
Yeah, no, I know. I remember after that, she had like extreme stomach pain for hours too.
Extreme stomach pain for hours. Yeah, I mean that could be pH balance also.
Yeah, it's crazy. It goes to show though, like this stuff gets so fucking complex and so complicated. And you know, you see me post about this. I don't know if you're on TikTok or not, but it's insane. Every time I post anything on there, trying to just even simplify some of these topics just to help educate people who want to take this more seriously and say, you know, well, you can't just, you know, do an aggressive cut for fucking 12 weeks. Thyroid regulation is going to happen. And then, or, you know, you should eat multiple times throughout the day because of most of the proteins of this is all these things. And people just don't want to fucking hear any of this. Like there's almost no point in educating these people. And I really try to make it as simple to understand. It's just, it doesn't matter as long as you're in a deficit, as long as you do your cardio, as long as you get your meals. It's like, no, like, can you make progress doing that? Yes. But like, sure. Are you going to hit a wall? Probably. Like, are there smarter approaches? Are there better approaches if you actually want to pursue bodybuilding? Yes. And like, here's why. This is why it's complicated. And then it's like, oh, you just made that up. You may have just made that up. You want me to cite you a fucking study that says that downregulation happens in the thyroid? Like, fuck off.
Yeah. It's like, have you ever heard of survival of the fittest, right? Like, usually the skinnier person is probably going to live longer because their probably thyroid doesn't downregulate all that much, or it functions well downregulated, right? Because you're getting less food, right? Why would the body want more food if it is going to starve? The answer is it doesn't. It wants to survive. Like, the body is so sophisticated, but use critical thinking skills. That's really what it comes down to, is use critical thinking skills. It's like, yeah, technically, like steroids upregulate muscle protein synthesis basically indefinitely, and it will keep going up and up and up. But what's our limiting factor? Our body. Like our genetics, right?
Yeah.
Like we've got certain points of diminishing return, or else we'd all be Ronnie Coleman. We'd take grams and grams of gear, and we'd just be 300 plus pounds walking around. But that's just not how it works. But yeah, when spacing meals, no one even talks about pH balance of the stomach, right? The more food you ingest, the more stomach acid you have to produce. And that can create severe acid reflux, and then maybe you get an ulcer eventually, right? I've had an ulcer before. It's definitely not fun. I was pissing out my ass for multiple months.
Fuck. Yeah, this does not sound fun. I just posted a video, I think it was last night. I think I posted it on Instagram earlier today. But it's just basically talking about like replacing meals with if you say you go throughout the day and you fall behind and, you know, you miss 2 meals. So like, now let's just get 5 guys, right? Let's just replace that and, you know, make up for the calories and macros. Like, that's not how it works. You know, there's multiple issues that could come with that. One, like, you know, obviously if it could cause digestive issues. 2, you're like throwing yourself off of a schedule because, you know, someone like me, you have a hard time eating in off season and you need to get your body to acclimate to that, get your metabolism functioning in a way so that you can efficiently eat those meals and be consistent with that. Now you miss 2 of those meals and try to replace that very well like throws shit off. And I know it's thrown shit off for me before in the past. I talked about it in the last couple podcasts with Niall Darwin and Callum Raystrick, and they said the same thing. It's like, yes, this is very important. I post that on TikTok, and these motherfuckers go, "Well, tell Roman Fritz to stop. Tell Roman Fritz that he can't have McDonald's for a refeed." Then I was like, "What the fuck are you even talking about? A refeed is planned, and it's not the same thing as being lazy and unprepared and just replacing meals. And what does this have to do with anything I'm saying? Like, people don't critically think about anything that you say online. It's fucking amazing. Like, you could say, you have to space your meals out throughout the rest of the day, and they'll basically be like, oh, so you're telling me to fast. Like, it just makes no fucking sense.
Yeah, and one of the posts that you put up there was basically explaining why you should space your meals. And yeah, the most important macronutrient to space out is protein. And yeah, we don't know how much muscle protein synthesis you can get out of a certain meal. We have 70 grams of beef studies showing that it increases muscle protein synthesis. It may be uncapped. And there are some people out there that have one meal a day and then the strongest men in the world. Does that mean that that's going to work for the majority of us? No. Yeah. Is it the most optimal way to do it also? Probably not. Because we know that muscle protein synthesis does have a certain ceiling for most people. But what is that ceiling? We don't know. It's really hard to make up anything besides potentially protein. But the thing is protein's so hard on the digestive system. Protein's probably the hardest thing to make up of anything. In my personal opinion, if anything, the only thing that I personally think that you can really make up in a day, and this is with the utilization of potentially insulin because it will help with digestion, is carbohydrates. And you're talking predominantly endurance level athletes who are needing insulin to replace and shuttle enough carbohydrates because you're just melting through it when you're doing an endurance sport. Like whenever you're running a marathon and stuff like that, the limiting factor is how quickly can you get the glycogen back into the muscle tissue. And the only thing that really does that better than anything else is insulin.
Yeah. I talk about that too. I talk about insulin sensitivity. Doesn't matter. But like, what insulin's not going to make you fat. Like, what did you even hear a single thing that I just said? Did you even listen, or did you just hear the word insulin and correlate that with some other shit you heard your mom say? Like, it's amazing. It makes you like not even want to try to educate people online, because like, I guess some people do gain from it, which is great. I love that. But the people who are the loudest are the ones that are always the ones who can't fucking think, and it just consumes the comment section. It's frustrating, but
no, it's not frustrating anymore, because at this point in my life, I've understood it as noise, and we surround ourselves with like-minded individuals, and the ones that actually want to learn, which is the majority of people, by the way, they will take most out of it. Like, and it might be 90% of the people that are watching your stuff, and then the other 10% are there to argue. And, you might also have a 10% populace out of that 90% that don't agree with 50% of the stuff that you say, and they might have an intelligent argument against it. And that's okay. I welcome, like, just like you would welcome an intelligent argument and be like, look, this is actually not an argument. This is an intelligent conversation. There are opinions that you have. I would like to understand them. And that's where people are getting so far away from, is everyone's opinion matters. But what's the reasoning behind that opinion? And let's have a conversation about it. And I don't have to agree with your opinion because of certain things that I've seen, and contextually or relatively. Like, yeah, this study looks awesome. Is it the future? Well, it's called the weight of science. It has to have a large weight to actually hold relativity. Kind of like the theory of relativity wasn't proven as a law. It was a theory for 100 years. And wow, we have enough technology to say, wow, this is a law now.
Yeah, no, I mean, having intelligent conversation is always welcome. Obviously, like, the problem with that is like almost what never happens. It's just somebody trying to come at you, and they're like, this is wrong. This guy, don't listen to this guy, doesn't know what he's talking about. And then, but every single time that happens, I mean, every single time, it's never happened with somebody that you click on their profile and, for one, they even look good, or they're like literally like above the age of 21 years old. So it's like, then you're like, okay, listen, like, you're 18, don't even engage with the conversation. Obviously, at that point, they can't comprehend that because they think they're on top of the world. It's like, just because you're older, you know more. It's like, I think we can all agree that at 18 years old, there's no fucking chance that you're going to be more intelligent than somebody that has done this for 10 plus years and does this for a living. Like, it's just not even a possibility unless that person's absolutely an idiot.
So you want to hear the best one that I've had ever online, and it just happened within the past week.
What is it?
There was a comment on my post saying that olive oil is one of the best fats you can ingest for cholesterol, period. End of story. Like, that's one of the best things that you can digest is olive oil. And as far as labs are concerned, right, like it definitely supports HDL and LDL pretty well. Now, obviously, tolerance amounts, we know that. You can't just drink olive oil and it's going to improve your cholesterol. So the argument was olive oil is garbage for you. It is vegetable oil. I'm like, hold up a minute. I was like, first off, I'm like, just critical thinking. Like, and I didn't say that out loud, but I was like, olives are fruits, first off. 2, vegetable oil is usually soybean oil. Depends on it, but about like 80+% is soybean, which is not good for you. And that's like saying canola oil is good for you. Canola oil is not good for you. And then he goes down a rabbit hole of he's defending himself at this point, saying that omega-6 causes autism. And I wish I was making this up. So then he posts a PubMD. Like, I asked him to just Google what vegetable oil was at first, and he got offended to it. I'm just like, dude, just Google vegetable oil. Like, do yourself a favor. And so he must have Googled omega-6 causing autism, and then he posts a PubMD correlation study, and pretty much the summary was, it was like 600 people and a correlation between autism and omega-6, and it says, need to be looked at further. And there's no other studies that really point to it. And that's a correlation. I was like, you understand correlation is not causation, just as reference for yourself or future. And dude, this guy has probably shot me 50 DMs, going off and on and going down it, saying how I'm incorrect. And I was like, you know what omega-6 is actually really good for, which you probably don't know? Building muscle tissue. I was like, arachidonic acid is the first step of muscle hypertrophy. And he just goes off even further. It's like, all right.
It's like there's not even any point, honestly. I think that's something I learned. It's like you can't argue with these people. That like they're not gonna be wrong. They don't want to be wrong. If they're publicly commenting this stuff coming at you, like they're not gonna be convinced any other way. And it's like, show me the study. It's like I'll never fucking show anybody study just because I think that's caused so much damage in this industry. And I don't want to say that because that's if like I'm against science or anything, but it's like you can find studies to back fucking any argument. It doesn't matter. And 99% of people aren't going to even read the study, or they're going to click on it and like read the abstract and have no idea what they're looking at it, take something and run with that. And that's why we have all this fucking misinformation. It's like you can find a study that says that nutrient timing doesn't matter, right? You're going to get the same outcome. But like, you don't understand any of the actual mechanisms. You don't understand the actual context and what you're actually trying to do as a bodybuilder, and that you're literally fighting homeostasis 24/7. It's like, do we have a study on that? Do we have a study on Mr. Olympia trying to gain 30 fucking pounds in an off season? No, we don't. So like, it's insane. I don't know. I don't know how to really handle it at this point. People just don't know how. They don't want to learn. They just want a simple answer, and they think a study is just that simple, and they trust it because it's published on PubMD. They have the literature right there, so that's the answer.
Yeah, and there is some great literature out there by all means, but like here's a frame of reference for a really good piece of literature that doesn't hold true to the argument that he was trying to like defend. And it was a really good conversation. Like we actually had a good conversation on it, which I love, right? He posted a PubMD study and I go to it and it was really well done. It's one of the biggest subsets of data ever when it comes to THC. It was on Delta 9 actually. And I'm like, okay, so the actual piece of information that you're wanting me to look at, by the way, is pulled from this study. It's a subset because it was a conglomerate of studies, so it was really well done. It was macro. And I was like, but this is with women in their luteal phase only. Like, and I'm like, does this apply to our populace? And he goes, wow, I didn't even realize that. I'm like, well, people don't read studies all day, every day, right? Like, I love this. Like, I love reading studies. And there are way better people out there reading studies and delineating whether a study is good or not. But it doesn't hold, that populace doesn't even apply to this certain circumstance. While it's a great study for this circumstance, it doesn't actually apply.
Mm-hmm. It's just, I don't know. I think people... And like, I don't know how to say this without saying an asshole, but most people are literally just retarded. Like there's no way around it. Like they cannot think. It's like you hear it all the time with the the one steroid cycle that was that 12 week study or whatever, where the guys didn't train and they still gained muscle. And now you use that for every argument. Anytime they see somebody, well, actually, you could take steroids and not even train or not know what you're doing, still with muscle. It's like, no, like, did you look at that study at all? Do you take any context into consideration? Like, do you think you're going and building 15 pounds of muscle just from using gear after you've been training for 5 years just because you fucking put androgens into your body? You think that's just going to happen? No, it's not the same thing. It's not how it works, but they don't actually understand this shit. How do you feel about the whole introduction, the science-based community blowing up, the science-based?
So it makes it really hard because it's way more simple. Like, this stuff is way more simple than people want to make it out to be. So for instance, that's like me taking a DEXA scan and starting off the same body fat and same composition, dieting down for a show, which there's no way I'm growing muscle tissue in a massive deficit, and taking steroids and just being like, hey, look, I accrued 15 pounds of muscle tissue and I also dropped 30 pounds of body fat. No, it's called a DEXA scan. It's expanding the muscle tissue and the cells in that area. You know what happens when I come off the steroids? Boop, right back down to normal. Maybe lower because I was in a deficit for so long. If I was blasting thyroid hormone and eating my muscle tissue away at the meantime, probably going to be worse circumstance. So science-based community, what do I think about it? The training-based community has been a very interesting one to me lately because you know what creates muscle hypertrophy is training close to failure. Period. End of story. Like, most people don't actually know what failure training is, and that's the hard part that I have. It's like, you know what I used to do? The biggest that I ever got, I would go to the gym, lift until my central nervous system was shot to the point where I couldn't move. I'd go home, I'd eat food, and I'd sleep, and you know what? If I need an off day because my CNS is blowing out, at that point, I probably needed 2 days off at that point. Then I'd take 2 days off. That's how Dorian Yates used to train. And now he had a training book, right, where he tracked. And I will say I hit a point where in my career, I did need to have, all that I had to do was 2 major compound movements per day and make sure that I did progressive overload. And the way that I did progressive overload was I did 3 sets of a certain weight, of a certain number, and I tried to hit that number every single set. And once I could do that number 3 sets in a row, I'd either increase the reps or I'd increase the weight. And I tried to rinse and repeat over and over and over again. And it was the most mundane thing ever. And you know what? It was so fun because it was making progress. And it's the most progress I ever made. There was no rocket science. For legs, it was squats and a leg press. For chest day, I actually stayed away from flat bench after like I tore my labrum. But it was an incline bench press and an incline dumbbell press. There was no rocket science behind it. And it's the best I ever looked. The most progress I ever made. And then as I got older, I realized my joints and ligaments don't hold up as much. So I wanted to make sure that the movement felt like a machine. And then I realized that form almost matters more than, I'm going to get so much heat for this. Form almost matters more than progressive overload because it creates an internal stimulus. So the better that your form is, the less weight and reps are probably needed. Now, obviously, progressive overload will always be king. It will, and I'm not saying against that, but form matters so much. Perfect the movement, hit the movement over and over again, and get stronger on the movement. And that's the fundamental route to training. And even the science-based educators right now have to agree with that because that's what the science is.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of these guys do, but it's just like the problem with fucking social media is people make these polarizing statements because that's what works. That's what catches attention. People don't want to learn. They don't want to sit through even a fucking 60-second video and listen to something. So you just got to say something like, my muscle connection doesn't matter, progressive overload. It's like, that's not true at all. It's not true at all. Like, maybe that's some good thing to take into consideration for a beginner who just is overly emphasizing trying to squeeze the muscle, sure. But, you know, you need to actually be able to execute with intent. And if you can't feel your fucking chest when you're pressing anything, that's probably a sign that something's wrong. You should be improving in that aspect. And especially if time goes by and you don't actually see significant progress, because you could get stronger and not build muscle. People think those things are, they work together, which they do, but it's not always complementary. One can happen without the other. And if you obviously want to bodybuild and the primary focus is hypertrophy, then executing with intent needs to be, I think, in my opinion, like the ultimate priority. Maybe not so much in the beginner, just because they don't have that tissue, it's going to be a lot harder to develop those neurological connections. But that should be something they're focusing on trying to improve as they get more advanced. Training is a skill. As they get more stronger and stronger, it's like, okay, how's my execution? Can I feel my chest when I'm pressing? Can I feel, my quads when I'm doing an actual squat? Am I getting, actually looking at the form, adequate knee flexion, having that nailed down? But overly emphasizing as beginners, obviously not going to be, it's probably going to be hindering in some aspects, but everything has a time and place. But people take these polarizing statements and then they think that just applies to everything. And it creates so much misinformation going around.
Yeah, and you need to be able to feel the mind to muscle connection, and this is the ultimate reason behind the statement, and this is why I'll stick with it. Because once the load gets high enough to where it takes one bad movement and you blow something out, that's going to set you back way further because you're not making progress at that point. You're recovering, and that recovery is a very long period of time. What builds beautiful physiques is beautiful form with heavy loads. And that's really ultimately, I think, the statement that holds true. But injuries set you back more than anything else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, so then how do you feel about the exercise, the science-based community, though?
I don't like any extremes, man, because extremes don't progress society. I'm okay with a crazy study coming out and them talking about it, but not being the next best thing since sliced bread. If there's weights that you're hanging to the wings of the bird and you're seeing how much muscle tissue the weight of the wing of the bird is doing over the next 30 days, and it's the most progress that we've ever seen mathematically of any muscle tissue ever being grown, and then you apply it to a human, what human being is going to put 30-pound weights on their hands and being able to do it and holding their weight out to the side of their arm for the next 30 days? It's not going to happen. Now, is it a cool thought process? Sure. But how can you actually make it apply? But you can't push that and say, hey, this is the next best thing since sliced bread, because it's not. The weight of science, that matters.
Yeah. I think my problem with the science-based community is that I think the majority of people that identify as science-based literally just don't understand science, and they use this terminology as a way to make themselves feel superior or more intelligent. Like, I know more than you because I read the abstract of a study, when in reality, these are the people who take these things out of context almost all the time, and they regurgitate it, creates this misinformation, and they just run with it because this is the literature, this is what it says, but they don't actually understand the mechanisms. They don't understand context, and they just say, well, this is science. I'm science-based, and you're bro science. It's like, bro science is, from what I've seen, people just refer to anything they don't understand as bro science. Like, sure, there's meathead stuff that's bro science, but again, I could say that we should eat every 2 to 4 hours to maximize muscle protein synthesis, and now that's bro science. Is it bro science, or is it just following how the body works and trying to maximize that outlet and following also what every bodybuilder does that has anecdotally worked the best every single time? Like, they try to downplay it as bro science, and I'm science-based. It's just, the majority of the community is just not people who understand science. Because if you look at guys who do, the researchers, a lot of these guys, like Brad Schoenfield, these guys, they all agree with the stuff we say. Like, we'll say, like, sure, we don't have literature that says fasted cardio is better, but if we're talking about somebody who's trying to, like, really get down to 4% body fat at the stage, like, that 1%, is it something worth considering? Could it make a difference? It definitely could. Like, they'll say that, but then the kids that say I'm science-based won't understand that and will still just go by off of whatever the abstract of the study says.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. The scientists aren't the ones pushing the extremes. The ones conducting the studies aren't pushing extremes. They present the information that they find, and that's where they leave it. And they're like, you know what? You know what most abstracts say? There needs to be more follow-up on this. Almost every single time. Until there's enough information where it's consolidated down to macro, and you know what the bottom of that abstract says? It doesn't say that there needs to be more information found on this subject anymore, because there's enough information where they have the answer that they were looking for. And the whole point of science is to prove something wrong, not to prove something right. So science is an observation. That's all that science is. And if we constantly are observing things in nature, such as what is yielding the best results over and over again, and there's not a scientific study that backs it, but we've seen it thousands and thousands of times be correct. Can you just omit that? Not necessarily, because that's still science. Like, that's still observational study. Is it conducted in a controlled environment? Maybe not. But a lot of the things that we're doing in bodybuilding will never be in a controlled environment, and ever. So that's, I think, ultimately where my stance is observational studies matter. John Meadows, he came up with a lot of things for training. He used to say, this was actually a big one, right? You don't need to go on full range of motion on a leg press. It yields just as good as results doing partial range of motion. And it would usually be around parallel, right? But it might just be even shy of parallel. And then there was a study, this is right before he passed away actually, and he goes, good thing I didn't wait for a study to release on this.
Yeah, he said, I'm glad I didn't wait around for science to prove things I already know. That's the thing. Exactly a lot of this shit that bodybuilders have been doing, like people act like we've gotten so much smarter and there's been so much more science and like obviously there's been more studies, but a lot of the shit that we figure out, bodybuilders already figured out a long time ago. And then also science will come out and try to like disprove that, and there will be this time period where everybody says this is not correct, and then it's like it actually is correct. I remember there's a time period a few years ago where everybody was suddenly saying that lat pull downs are for your teres upper back and not for the lats. That was a huge thing. And obviously for for decades, I was all over TikTok for decades. We all know lat pull downs for lats, but then TikTok science-based influencers, looked at an anatomy book, didn't understand biomechanics, and started saying this is an upper back exercise. That took over, and now we're back to everybody understanding that it's lats again. So it's like these people change their minds so quick off of just like not really understanding shit to the full extent, and it hurts. It hurts people.
The fitness community goes in circles, though. It's kind of like, it's almost like clothing, right? Like right now, like the 80s is back in style. It was the 70s like last year, and now it's the 80s, and it'll be the 90s again. Like I'm sure we'll get like Jinko jeans back or something like that. So probably not the actual company, but they'll like rip it off. Or the hammer things that you put in, like I didn't even know that was a thing until people posted about it recently. Those little like hooks on the edges of the jeans, that was like to hold hammers or something like that.
What the fuck?
Dude, I didn't even know. Learn something new on TikTok every day. But yeah, the fitness community goes in like circles, right? Just like I call it the clothing community because it's the same exact thing. It's kind of like metformin. Everyone should be taking metformin. It's like metformin's direct mechanism of action actually reduces down like mTOR, which is responsible for muscle protein synthesis. And like originally, like it was like, look, like metformin, it increases skeletal muscle glycogen. That's really important. We think that that's the next big thing. And you know what happened? This was when Matt Porter was around. And you know what? Everyone was trying metformin, trying to make it like work properly. And you know what? It wasn't the next best thing since sliced bread. They're like, no, maybe it doesn't really have much of a place like in the enhanced world. You know what's way better for beta cell degradation in the pancreas? Insulin.
Of course.
Imagine that. And it helps the growth factor raise a little bit better.
Who would have thought? Insulin. But
I mean, all is insulin.
You see, I mean, I think this is obviously a much bigger issue in just the normal fitness side of things than it is actually like the competitive aspect, because I think a lot of bodybuilders like understand more context and nuance, and a lot of these guys are like listening to coaches who just have experience and know what they're doing. But even then, we see some of these guys in the bodybuilding side trying to take on this role of like science-based education and things of that nature. And I have listened to a lot of these guys, and I'm not going to say that they're not intelligent, but a lot of these guys become very dogmatic in listening to these approaches. And the more research I've done, because I've listened to these guys and, for a while I've I learned some stuff from them, but also at times it's questionable. And, I've also had Phil in my ear a lot telling me like, this is bullshit. Cause Phil's always like, yeah, like this is bullshit. I don't care what the science says. And I'm like, I would always like try to go back and forth with Phil a little bit, but guess what? Every time he was right. Cause the more research that I did and dug deeper and deeper, a lot of these guys say shit and it's almost as if they're not doing really deep research or like just bullshitting this mechanism. Like the one that I can reference that was recently was, you keep seeing this, everybody talk about this, is that androgen receptors don't downregulate. And I listened to some guys talk about this. I looked at a bunch of studies, I did research, and I couldn't find anything supporting that they do downregulate, but only upregulation, which does make sense that they would initially upregulate. But everybody that's talking about it is completely just dismissing the fact that they can downregulate. Like, that doesn't happen. That's not why progress would stall down. Like, it's because of this, and that, and like there is no downregulation that occurs. And I'm just thinking about it, like, why would they not downregulate? And eventually, like, more and more research, I found some studies that clearly show that downregulation did occur. Like, you could see the baseline, the androgen receptor content was here, and that 6 weeks after testosterone therapy, they were back down to baseline. So we have studies showing that the downregulation does occur. Like, it's there. I don't know why all these guys that say they're science-based completely dismiss it, because if they don't agree with it, why aren't we even having a conversation about it? Why are we just saying it doesn't happen? You know, it's a fucking, it's just weird how people act.
Yeah, androgen receptors is a pretty complex subject. And against the pharmacokinetics behind it, technically it's uncapped, right? Where it continues to upregulate. And really the cap out point is not the androgen receptor. The cap out point, well, the cap out point might be the amount of androgen receptors we have in the body, but technically the body continues to upregulate androgen receptors and creating new androgen receptors to the best of its ability. And that's obviously a process that it has to go through, and it takes time. That's one reason why titration of dosages makes sense, is because the body doesn't magically have tons and tons of androgen receptors. It will create them over time, and you're going to have more muscle tissue and create it, and upregulating gene transcription and stuff like that. And that's what steroids do really well, is upregulating. They technically don't downregulate, and I'd be really curious to see the studies that you've seen. Now, the conversation really needs to be had with Kurt Havens. He has a PhD.
That's why I watched his podcast about this, and I did a podcast.
So I need to watch it. I haven't seen it.
I watched it with him. I didn't watch it with him. I watched it, the podcast of him with fucking that other dude, Dean Martin or something. Not Dean Martin. Is that his name? Yeah, and you know, they made good points in there. They had the good stuff, but the whole time, the whole topic of them downregulating was just dismissed. Like, it just doesn't happen, and nobody could explain why it doesn't happen. And we have studies showing that it does happen. We have studies showing that the content went down after the 6 to 8 week mark. So why isn't it being discussed? I don't know. I have no idea. But I do know that as we titrate up dosages, right? This is what I do. This is what I have all my guys do. Obviously, the upregulation is not going to be linear, right? You can't go from 750 tests to 1400, and it's not going to just continue that same amount, right? So if you stayed at that same dosage for 750 over the course of 16 weeks, are you saying that you don't think downregulation would occur regardless of that at some point? Okay. And why do you say that?
Well, do you just start losing muscle tissue? Do you stop growing as quickly? The answer, I still haven't seen someone stop growing. Now, obviously, because things are continually upregulating over that period of time, and you're building more muscle tissue, maybe we're not creating more androgen receptors after a certain point, and so the expansion of the tissue and the actual recruitment of more satellite cells, maybe that does start capping out. But as far as downregulating androgen receptors, I don't think that we're truly accruing more like lower amounts of dense tissue, like true muscle tissue. I'm talking like actual, like true fibers that we're going to retain if we were to go from like back down to like TRT kind of levels. I don't see that actually reducing down in relativity ever anymore. Now, maybe it's because like my dosing choices are way lower than they used to be. But I don't see that in practice either, though. Now, obviously, we have that expansion. It is rapid in the beginning, and anyone that says otherwise is like, and there probably will be a cap out point too. And I think that it is actually at more of a genomic level. Yeah. The interesting thing also comes down to the fact that when we come off, how long does it take for like genomic transcription to actually start to downregulate, right? Because it's a long period of time. I mean, like you can take guys that have been on grams of gear, right? And you pull them back down to tier T level and you keep them on tier T and they start working out again and they start building more muscle tissue like super rapidly as if they were on a cycle, which I just did recently. Everyone's like, are you getting back on stuff? I was like, no, I was like, I'm still on tier T. I just started training harder again and I started accruing tissue as if I was on like literally androgens. Like it looked like I was starting to blast and stuff like that. And sure enough, it was just training. But is it like that my genomic, at a genomic level, are those androgen receptors just more receptive to starting to upregulate in a faster manner? I don't have an answer for, because I don't know if even we have the science to support that piece of it. Is like the actual process of the cells and the androgen receptors slowly downregulating over time, but at a genomic level. what actually transpires afterwards. So I was actually talking to Kurt about that. And because I was talking about myostatin inhibition, like testosterone does inhibit myostatin to a certain extent, right? To what extent, we don't know really. And how long does it take to actually start to reduce back down to that normal level? Is it 10 years? Is it 20 years? I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. No, so I think the argument for the downregulation occurring is that a lot of guys would claim that they get, like, after that first 6 to 8 to 10 week phase of a cycle, like, they just don't see the same level of results. Now, is that accredited to actual, like, water retention, things of that nature, just like that initial psychological aspect that you experience from going up from a normal state? I don't know. Is that actual tissue accrual? I don't know. I do know that I looked into this a lot. This is something that Dante was really big on too, was doing only 6 to 8 week cycles with a 4 week break in between. And, it's something that he stood by a lot, but his break was also 500 milligrams a test for 4 weeks. And then he would go back up and blast. So I don't know. It is very interesting. Then is that also, if it did downregulate, because you will still make progress, obviously. You're not seeing progress in the stop, but obviously we titrate up, so we continue to make more progress. That's why if we stay at the same dosage, it's going to be worse. So is that due to a downregulation aspect? Because if you're downregulating, you could still make progress. No, it doesn't mean that it's going to stop, but do you notice that you make better progress in that first 2 to 3 months of a cycle than when you start pushing from 12 to 16 to 20 weeks? Or is that also just accredited to other factors as, like, maybe just inflammation, things of how the antibiotics are affecting your body? Like, there's so much shit that goes into it, right? But I do know that we have studies on it, so I will send them to you. I'm curious what you think of them.
Yeah, definitely. Send them my way. I'd be curious to see what they say, because I don't really think that they down-regulate. Like, if we're at 600 milligrams, we take it to 600 milligrams, we stay at 600 milligrams for a year versus 12 weeks, I think that the tissue accrual is going to be just as fast. The only difference is the satellite cell recruitment and stuff like that. We're not going to continually, like, get the cells bigger, right? Because we're no longer increasing that threshold. Another way that I look at this is, like, when you're looking at a natural genetic potential, right? If that person can be 220 pounds, max genetic potential, and then their testosterone levels would equate to 100 milligrams per week, right? And you take them to 200 milligrams per week, well, maybe that threshold is now 230 pounds. Well, they're not going to get past 230 pounds until you take that testosterone level to 300 milligrams, right? Because that was the maximum threshold. But I don't know how long it would have taken them to get to the 230 pounds, right? But they would eventually be able to hit that threshold over that period of time due to the increase in the amount of androgen receptors. And maybe it's more at a genomic level than anything else. So that's the way that I at least view androgens overall. And I think that's also another reason is the psychological aspect of having to see the body shrink down, why they keep their cap out point at a higher level, which mine was 300 milligrams. I never had a negative lab impact, but it does have a negative impact on my heart because I do create higher hematocrit levels. And that's actually the reason why I got on telmisartan was circulatory issues. I did have a little bit of angiotensin issues from it.
Okay. So why would the androgen receptors be significantly different from something like insulin or, like clenbuterol? You use clenbuterol, like you have downregulation with that as well. You have, I'm assuming I don't know if it would happen with thyroid. Does it happen with thyroid? If you abuse T3, you'll have downregulation?
No. You won't have like downregulation. You can drive someone into hyper ranges and give them Graves' disease essentially and like make them hate their lives.
Fuck. Yeah.
Yeah, terrible. Well, I mean, it happens, man. People are just like, oh, here's like 150 micrograms of T3. Everything's fine. Don't worry about your eyes bulging out of your head.
Yeah. So when you approach cycles, are you typically sticking to a specific time frame?
That is something that has changed over my years of being in bodybuilding. I like slow and steady because I think the limiting factor is time more than anything else. I think everyone likes to try to get from point A to point Z as quickly as possible. I think that you're going to hit point Z eventually in your bodybuilding career when your body's ready to be there. So it doesn't require a copious amount of steroids to get there. It doesn't expedite the process as much as people think. I think low amounts of growth hormone, praying that muscle hyperplasia happens over time so we truly get actually true muscle tissue, Plus, well, obviously insulin's always nice for the growth factor ways getting opened up to potentiation of muscle hyperplasia to increase. Plus testosterone in lower dosages over longer periods of time and then pulling it back down. And going based off of labs is really what I like to do the predictive analysis on. Also during that time, I can do predictive analysis of, hey, does this person actually get estrogen issues at these points? Do they have angiotensin issues, like extra water retention from estrogen? Do they get acne from estrogen? Do they get nipple sensitivity from estrogen? All those are things that I like to take into the equation, because then I can be like, okay, well, when does Primo need to be deployed? Or if they're not estrogen sensitive, maybe a Masterone instead to help with the nipple sensitivity, since it acts more of a SERM than an AI. So I don't have to bring down their estrogen levels, and then the estrogen can help with some more IGF-1 production, right? Most people can't run estrogen to the moon. I was someone that wasn't estrogen sensitive, but my estrogen also, I didn't aromatize very much either. As I got older, this is what is unique. I did start to aromatize more, but I still was not estrogen sensitive. However, I am prolactin sensitive. So for me, I had to be aware of prolactin. And I find that guys are either estrogen sensitive or prolactin sensitive. And no, this doesn't mean that your prolactin on your labs has to be high, just like your estrogen doesn't have to be high. You can just be sensitive to it. Nipple sensitivity is going to come from one or the other. And it's going to be prolactin or estrogen. That's usually what I find. And also estrogen being high is going to eventually elevate prolactin levels just because of the estrogen receptor site. And then if you want to throw fuel into the fire, Tren is going to upregulate gene transcription of prolactin production at the estrogen receptor site. So if you're really prolactin sensitive, you also don't need high prolactin levels though to have prolactin gynecomastia happen.
You could also
I like longer cycles.
There's also prolactin receptors like here. If you like fuck with gyno, if you start itching it a lot, you can literally cause more prolactin secretion and make it worse if you start fucking with your nipples.
That's interesting. I actually did not know that.
Yeah, like the guys will always like pinch their nipples and like itch it and shit. It literally will just cause more inflammation, and it'll cause more prolactin secretion.
Because it's stimulating the actual receptor site.
Yeah, I guess so. Something along the lines of that.
That doesn't surprise me. It's kind of like friction, like where hair is. You grow more hair there, and that's like tissue. That is like true tissue.
Yeah. So when you're titrating doses up, is it typically, are you just watching as you go by, or do you typically go like every 4 to 6 weeks, like you bump up or something along the lines of that?
Yeah, so in the beginning, it'll be like 4 to 6 weeks, right? Because like also the other thing is you have to take in the psychology of the athlete. No one talks about psychology. You have to take in the psychology. Like people need to see results in a certain period of time, but you also don't want to shorten how much progress they can make over that elongated period of time. Like if they're trying to get to point Z, like what is still the fast way to get there without what is the fastest way to get there? And I still think it's over a long period of time, right? So it's like, if I bump it 100 milligrams, okay, well, what's it going to be the psychology of the athlete? Are they going to feel stronger? Because the neurotransmitter effects are definitely very prevalent with steroids. So I like 100 milligram bumps or so every 4 to 6 weeks. Now, it might be faster in the beginning. It might be slower, but usually it has to do with the psychology of the athlete. When the athlete sees progress in a short period of time, guess what happens? The athlete's going to go to the gym and they're going to start training harder. So their progressive overload intensifies. And then eventually they're going to hit a cap out point of they can't recover from it anyways. So it's like, how fast can you make the recovery, right? And that's where like, it's like, okay, where do we start modifying? When are they going to get lab impacts? Things like that.
Okay. Now, have you ever run shorter cycles, like 8 weeks on, things like the Dante? Have you noticed any difference with those types of approaches?
So when it comes to prep, because prep is 0 to 100 kind of, I like 12-week sets of time. So that is the time when I will say why, because you're healthier. Like if you're not healthy, why are you going to prep in the first place? So I actually have long elongated health phases with most of my guys and women. And then it will be maximum 12 weeks with a guy when it go into a show. The only way that it might be a difference is like at 16 weeks out, like, and they're all like true TRT, like 150 milligrams or 200 milligrams, like maybe taking dosages up just ever so slightly, right? Because my entire early bodybuilding career, it was, well, I take it back. It was always 12 weeks since a time. However, when I was with Matt Porter, the best progress I ever made was how long can we go until your labs get impacted? And I went from 183 pounds to 253, 254 walk around weight at my biggest. And that was under a 6-month span of time. Now I hit 245-ish fasted after 4 months, but it was around 6 months before like I just felt like garbage.
Yeah.
You pulled out my testosterone and I was on NPP. Dude, I was watching a Disney movie on a plane and I started crying. And I was like, what is wrong right now? I got back home. I loaded the entire syringe full of testosterone.
What?
I felt like a man again, though. And then I was like, okay, back down to TRT. I was like, I'm coming off the NPP.
You got any crazy gear stories?
Oh, that one was a depressing one right there. Like, you had cried to a Disney movie on a plane. Crazy gear stories. You know, just recently, so I've never nicked like an artery or a vein or anything like that. My entire bodybuilding career, I don't know how I made it through without like spurting blood ever. And what?
I've had that happen a few times.
Dude, I've seen it happen. It's freaky when it happens. It never happened to me. I was lucky.
Yeah.
So I'm just recently I'm doing my shot at TRT, no joke. And when I'm doing my shot, all of a sudden I felt burning. And I felt like I was about to black out. I was like, oh shoot. And I could feel my lungs get lit up like fire. So I pull it out. Dude, I started spraying, but like I couldn't see anything because I was about to black out. Dude, I sprayed it all over the bathroom. It was like on the walls, on my white carpet, everywhere. And that was the first time I ever did it. And then probably the wildest one is Tren cough. I had one Tren cough episode. I remember this one very, very vividly. So I shoot it. And anyone that's had Tren cough can relate to this story. It's kind of like you get like a little build up and you're like, cough, cough, like I'm going to be fine. Cough, cough, cough. And like you get it for like 10, 15 minutes. Well, this time for some reason, I started getting this build up and I'm like, okay, I'm like, cool, like not a big deal. Well, at this point, I start like healing over my sink and I'm like, holy crap, like I'm getting a build up in my lungs now. My lungs feel like they're on fire. It was like worse than the flu. And all of a sudden it gets worse and worse and worse. Dude, I go into my shower and I'm like, the steam will help my lungs. Not a big deal. So I flip it on and I'm running like hot water. I keep coughing further and further and further. And I start coughing so hard, I think I'm coughing up blood. Like I'm like wiping my mouth, making sure that I'm not bleeding out of my lungs at this point. And it put me down into fetal position. It was like in a movie where like I literally curled up in a ball. I held my knees. And I'm like rocking back and forth, just coughing my lungs up with the shower running on me.
That's the only time you've gotten Tren cough?
No, I've gotten Tren cough a few times. I haven't gotten Tren cough a ton though, but that was the one that I avidly remember where it took me down into fetal position in the shower.
I've had it quite a few times. Have you ever taken psychedelics?
Yeah, bro. I'm huge into psychedelics.
Okay, so one time when I first met my girlfriend, we did acid together. We took LSD, right? And you know, we've known each other for not too long at this point, right? And it starts peaking, and I think I'm like 21 at this time. Yeah, I'm like 21, and it starts peaking, and I remember, I have the pin, right? So obviously, like I haven't known this girl that well. Like I'm not just gonna go pin in front of her, right? So I go into my bathroom. And I pin like a cc of Tren, right? And immediately this acid's peaking and I start to feel it. I'm like, fuck, it's going to happen. And I just start violently coughing. Dude, I'm in the bathroom for like 30 minutes, just in there, fucking freaking out. I start tripping. It was a terrible time. I'm like, I come out later and I'm like, my eyes are like fucking bloodshot. I'm like, holy shit. It was, that was probably the worst out of all of them, but I've had it happen a lot.
It So you're peaking from the acid and you're having Tren call for 30 minutes.
Yeah, just in the bathroom. I got this girl outside in my fucking living room. She's like, "What's going on?"
So the question is, I've never taken hallucinogenic dosages of acid, but I have microdose acid. And acid and microdoses, for everyone listening, feels like Adderall without heart stimulation. It helps you focus a lot. And if you do a little bit too much of the microdose where it gets a little bit too high, then you kind of get like that lights are kind of like wavy and stuff like that. So when you're running higher amounts of acid, were you hyper fixated on that cough was the question.
Probably, because everything becomes like hyper fixated.
That's so. And for anyone else listening, this is the trick, by the way, for Tren cough. And I have an albuterol inhaler right next to my sink, and I learned it on the tail end of my bodybuilding career when I wasn't getting Tren cough anymore, which I wish I had it on hand sooner. But it does work. Like you just do 2 puffs. As soon as you feel it coming on there, you have to hit it, because if not, you'll eventually get debilitated and you'll be like struggling, like, and you can't function when you get Tren cough. Like you're just like feeling around and like feel like it feels like everything's on fire at that point. It feels like fire ants in your body. Yeah.
If you don't know what it is, you think you're like, I'm about to die. Like this is not normal. The Tren is like the one steroid where it feels like you just took a drug. Like you start to taste like the metal and it's like, oh fuck, like what's
It's so true. Yeah, you get the metal taste in your mouth. You're like, oh boy. You feel the jaw quench down.
Like, it's gonna happen. Like,
I think Tren was the one drug where I was like, I can't believe this is what people. The thing is, like my third shot, I was like, I can't believe this is what like professional athletes do nowadays. Like I like have the shot in my butt or whatever. And I'm like, this is what professional athletes do. And like I just started feeling like a god. And then like as you start feeling like a god, then all of a sudden you realize you start feeling like a god because actually your anxiety heightening over time.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. Do you use it? Do you keep Tren specifically to preps, or do you ever use it in an off season?
So I have used it in an off season. I like, and this is bad. So I don't like Tren in an off season with any of my athletes because I don't feel like it's worth it. The only reason why I think Tren might have a place in the off season, and this is for my own use of Tren in the off season, was the psychological drive that you get from Tren, where it's not super liver toxic like an oral would, where you get that psychological drive. With Tren, you do get a psychological drive. So like if you're going through a push phase and you need that psychological drive to really push through and like flip that switch on and hit a hard lift, Tren is phenomenal for that. Also, it can't suppress your appetite. So if some people get really bad appetite suppression from Tren, if that's you, it's like a terrible drug. The other thing is I find like 50 milligrams, you can flip that switch on and off perfectly fine without completely destroying your life. However, like it's a super individual drug where if it's not good for you, it's not good for you. Just stay away. Like you don't need it to be a professional bodybuilder. Like you don't. Yeah. Like testosterone goes a very long way, and like that's all that you really need.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. I've never programmed Tren for anybody in an off season, but I've taken it in an off season many times just because I know I just fucking love taking it. I would rather take Tren than Mass. Honestly, me previously, it's not how I program because like. Objectively, you look at that, it's like, is this really like the smartest, safest approach? No. And, do I want to just, put that in somebody's protocol? Definitely not. If somebody came to me and was like, hey, I really want to train an off season, I'd probably be like, sure, let's give it a run. Nobody's come to me and said that though. But I also think it's been very demonized, and I don't think it's the worst steroid out there. I don't think it is. I think if you tolerate it well, it definitely does help. Like you said, that aggression in the gym in off season, you feel fucking insane. Like there's nothing better. I don't say there's nothing better because that sounds bad, but like when you're pushing growth and you're trying to get strong as fuck and you're just on Tren off season, it feels great. I don't know, for me at least.
No, and you're absolutely right. The other thing is like off season is time to balance out your finances, your relationship, all these other things. And if Tren is going to make you go through a breakup or a divorce and ruin your financial situation, your sense of well-being, well, that's the last thing that I need one of my athletes to go through is, oh yeah, let's take Tren that you can hit some heavy squats in the gym. Don't worry about your entire life, by the way. If that falls apart, don't worry. We'll have competition season coming right around the corner.
Yeah. But you've always tolerated it well.
Yeah, Tren mellows me out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I never really had any issues with any anabolics. Honestly, I've never gotten any bad side effects from anything. I don't think.
So when it comes to things changed up for me. Like as I got older, right? Like I'd probably say my late 20s, I started noticing some side effects where like my ability to tolerate Tren without negative psychoactive effects went down, like to like 150 maximum 200 milligrams per week is like where I started noticing a negative impact on my sense of well-being actually. Other than that, what like 200 and below I was pretty good with. 150 seemed to be that threshold. 300 and above, it ruins your life. And
what was the highest you went?
Dude, my first cycle ever. Do you want?
What is it?
That was the highest I ever went. It was 250 tests, 500 Tren. That's what I was advised.
Oh wow. Yeah.
Dude.
My first cycle was 500 tests and 50 D-ball.
250 tests, 500. Wait, sorry. Say that again.
500 tests and 50 D-ball.
So that's a traditional.
Yeah, it's basic 80 cycle.
Yeah, that's like the traditional, like Kickstarter. Welcome to steroids, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah, I got strong as fuck. It was fucking great.
Yeah, the other thing is the high estrogen, you'll feel great on it, right? So that's also what I talk about Dianabol. Is like I just don't like D-ball because like it drives up estrogen so high. It's basically a toxic form of estrogen because it survives in the liver for so long.
It says methyl estradiol, right?
Yeah, exactly, methyl estradiol. Yep. So it is definitely a very toxic form of estrogen. You can get estrogen in better ways like testosterone. But the interesting thing is I only ran oral D-ball for like a 2 weeks at a time ever. I didn't really like oral D-ball. Injectable D-ball, I ran a 4 weeks at a time and I actually did really well with it. Didn't notice any liver toxicity. My liver enzymes didn't get impacted. This was a long time ago. I was asked to find injectable Androl and I couldn't find it. So injectable D-ball was a substitution. And Androl, speaking of which, is another drug that's like demonized in the space right now. And it's a very well tolerated compound. In fact, I always did amazing with it until my gut got bad and I had gut dysbiosis. And what the issue with Anadrol is that it drives up histamine levels. So if you have gut dysbiosis and you're constantly kicking up histamine intolerances, then your histamine levels get driven up and then you can't eat food. So it usually actually has to do with histamine more than anything else. And even Benadryl doesn't combat Anadrol histamine drive up. So it's a very unique compound. But I think Anadrol is great for a push compound, 2 weeks at a time, no longer than that. I don't like liver toxic orals for more than 4 weeks. But like even on medical doctrine, it doesn't show that Anadrol is like super liver toxic. Like because we have data of them taking it for like over a year periods of time, and the medical dosages are way higher than bodybuilding dosages.
Mm-hmm. I'll use Anadrol and Anavar for guys in off-season phases, and most of them tolerate it very, very well.
Yeah, I like Anavar. I like Anavar for tendon support more than anything else.
Yeah. I think I'm actually going to start Anavar now, being post-op. I'm like 4 weeks post-op to help with what is that?
Yeah, this is Anavar Chokies scripted.
He's got Anavar right there. I used to, like I said, I took D-ball for my first cycle, and after that, I loved D-ball, and I took it a few times, but then, like you said, as I got older, after so many times I noticed, it just started to fucking wreck my appetite, and I responded way worse to it over time than I did like that first 3 or 4 times that I took it. I don't know what happened, what changed, but it's just now I don't touch it at all.
How old are you now?
I just turned 25.
You just turned 25? Dude, so I actually saw your physique at Nationals. You looked great, by the way.
Oh, you were there?
Yeah, I was there.
Oh, wow. Thank you.
I say low-key. No, I saw you. Like, I actually saw your physique, and I don't remember who I was standing next to. And I think it was during individual presentations, and I was like, I really like his physique. And then actually Jesse was the one that actually pointed out. They're like, yeah, you know who that was, right? She's like, that's the guy I told you about. I'm like, oh, okay, I really like his physique. He looks good. And this is like before you and I connected. But I really liked, like, you have, from a genetic standpoint and your insertion standpoint, you have a lot of potential. But I liked your conditioning too, your conditioning and fullness, the package that you brought. I just think that on that stage, I had a guy that was at North America's the previous year that was second place, Mr. Pro Card by one spot, and a lot of people had him actually in first place, my guy. And he ended up in, I think, 7th or 6th in Classic at that national show. He was an A. That show was the deepest national show ever.
Yeah, no, I got 6th in A, so he was in my class.
Wait, you were 6th in A?
Yeah, I was 6th in A.
Oh, so he was 7th in A.
Maybe, yeah. I guess. I'm not sure.
It was Corey Hank. He had the long hair and the gauges.
Okay. I think I remember who you're talking about. Yeah. No. Dude, after that show, I don't even know. This came from some guy posted some shit about somebody freaking out on stage. There were like these rumors about me freaking out and throwing this temper tantrum on stage. But you were there, so let's clarify that didn't fucking happen.
No,
dude,
what?
These fucking...
I didn't see anyone have a temper tantrum on stage at all.
No, it never happened.
It was... Like, everyone was, from what I saw, everyone was actually having a pretty good time backstage, like the athletes together and stuff like that. Like, it seemed like a pretty good community and like engagement between everyone backstage that I saw. I couldn't really get close to you guys when you guys were getting lined up because they segmented you guys off like hurdle as always because there were so many people backstage. But it looked like everyone was having a pretty good time for the most part. Like, that's the thing about these national shows is... the only reason why people look standoffish is because they're depleted down and there's a lot of people around them and they have no clue who they are. However, if you start a conversation with someone, usually they're super nice. Yeah. Like, and that's the most part backstage is if you just have a conversation with people, people aren't aggressive at all. Even though we're all depleted down, like we all want to have a good time on stage. We're all going through the same thing, like we just talked about. Like, we're all going through the same thing. There was no temper tantrum to be had in the entire show that I saw.
Yeah, no, these TikTokers made it up because I don't know. I guess they fucking had some vendetta and it fucking went viral. And I still get comments to this day. They're like, "Yeah, that's why you had a temper tantrum on stage when you lost." I'm like, "This never happened. This is literally you just made this up out of thin air. That never fucking happened." But yeah, that show was stacked. That show had over 50 competitors in that class.
I text Shane hugely when he was backstage. I'm like, bro, you need to come out here and look at this like first call out. I'm like, there's Olympia caliber athletes like in this lineup right now. And like the guy that was first place had to have had 30-inch legs, maybe 31-inch legs. He was insane. And he was not the most conditioned on stage. No. At all. He was just a freak of nature. The guy that I can't remember, the guy that was second place, I'm pretty sure was like nutty too. The guy that was third or fourth place, there was another guy that was like didn't go pro, who was straight up Olympia caliber genetics. Like, we'll probably be on the like some of those guys that were like beat you will be on the Olympia stage within 2 to 3 years. That's how good that lineup was.
Yeah. I wish I came in fuller because that show you saw like they didn't favor conditioning over fullness, right? I lost a lot of fullness to come in conditioned because of like we were just short on time. A lot of shit happened. It is what it is. But ultimately, I honestly do think if I would have just not even tried to come in more conditioned and would have stayed fuller with the way that they judged that show, it's like that's what they were favoring, and it looks like that's honestly what they're favoring more in a lot of these shows. They're straying more towards shape and fullness than they are conditioning now.
So if you see any of my athletes on stage, they're usually the most conditioned, but they're also the fullest. As long as you're conditioned up, I'm going to bring you in full as a house. Why? In my eyes, that is a beautiful physique. You've worked so hard to put on all this muscle tissue. I want you as full as possible. Why? That round, bubbly look, that's subconsciously the art of bodybuilding. If you look at the best physiques of all time, they were not the grainiest ones, right? It was like Flex Wheeler is considered the best physique probably of all time. And he was one of the roundest, bubbliest dudes on stage at all times. Not the most conditioned. He had amazing conditioning, don't get me wrong. But that's not what gave him that look. It was that fullness factor to him at all times.
Yeah. It's it's definitely because for a long time they were favoring a lot more conditioned, super striated glutes. And I just think that they're pulling away from that more now. You see it at the Olympia with Derek and Hottie and all this stuff, it seems like that's the direction I think Tyler is like trying to push for.
Yeah, which is the proper direction, which is aesthetics, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
they're taking aesthetics at the forefront. And this really started happening after Arnold made the statement in Brazil with the Arnold Brazil. I can't remember what year it was, and I think Tony Freeman was competing. He's like, he publicly said, he's like, on the stage, he was like, I basically wouldn't have had the winner be the winner at this show. And then they walked off stage. I'm like, damn, dude. I'm like, that makes the sport look bad. However, they really started tapering it in when Sean Roden won the Olympia. And I'm going to be honest with you, I had Phil winning that year. I had Phil winning that year. If you're going pose by pose, I had Phil winning by 1 to 2 poses. And I had Sean in second place. And I wasn't there in person, so I can't comment on it. And there are other people in person that will say otherwise, and other people that watch online that will say otherwise. But I personally had Phil winning that year by 1 pose, if not 2 poses. Because I can't give Sean Roden a side tricep against Phil Heath. Even if Phil lost his control of his core for like 3 seconds, it's like, it's one of the best, that's potentially the best arm in bodybuilding history on stage. I can't give that to anyone else. So that was, I think, the big statement is when Phil Heath's diastasis recti got so bad that they gave it to Sean Roden. And to be honest, it put the sport in a great direction as far as from a physique standpoint. And Tyler is potentially, if not the best thing to happen to bodybuilding, period.
You think so?
Tyler's amazing. Like, Tyler is an amazing judge. He is so objective. Like, I've heard his statements, and I've asked him to rip my athletes to shreds, right? I'm like, look, like, this is what we brought. I know you saw on stage. I'm like, for future, I'm thinking X, Y, and Z. He's like, I agree with that. He goes, and while we're at it, X, Y, and Z. I'm like, cool. Appreciate it. And that allows me to give direction of where I need to go, right? Because I'm not a posing guru, right? If they're posing incorrectly, if they pose this way, are they still lacking this muscle group? Or is it going to be over dominant? And I'll get an answer from him, right? He is amazing as far as I'm concerned. From a conditioning standpoint, from a muscularity standpoint, from a symmetry standpoint, the sport has gone in the right direction since he has been a judge.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. He's definitely doing a lot more than they were before. So he's stepping in and getting a lot of shit done, which is great. Now, with your guys, with how you execute preps, typically, obviously, everybody's different. But do you have like a preferred peaking strategy? Do you follow more front loading, back loading? I know everybody's different, but is there like some type of way that you tend to favor more?
Yeah. So my favorite way to answer this question is it has less to do with the peak and more to do with the prep.
Yeah.
And I've kind of revised this statement over the last several years. And I think the proof of a good physique on stage is a good prep, not a good peak. Now, peaking is an art, and I'll get into that in a second. Like, it is an art. And I have no preference, and I'm going to get into that in a second. So,
okay.
When I am prepping athletes, I refeed depending on what I think they're going to lose on or what muscle group they're losing that I need to keep intact. So if I think that they're going to lose on their chest, or maybe they're losing their chest, am I going to refeed their chest? Probably not. If I think they're going to lose on their chest over time, then I'm going to start refeeding that muscle group to keep it as full as possible, to keep putting glycogen into that muscle tissue. Why? Because the muscle tissue is like a balloon. So this is the analogy that I use for it. So we're going to be pumping it up, right? And elastic potential, and then eventually it pops, right? But if you keep pumping air into it, the elastic potential of that balloon starts to expand. And it allows for the re-expansion of it. So when I go to peak someone, well, it's going to fill out properly. And the muscle group that I thought we were going to lose on is going to fill out properly. So that's the way that I approach a prep, is as time goes on, what is depleting down? If everything's depleting down evenly, maybe I don't need many refeeds or any refeeds at all. I mean, usually if someone needs a refeed, because of the degradation of thyroid hormone, you can prevent the thyroid from down-regulating a little bit. So that's another thing. I do like 2-day refeeds. I don't do 1-day refeeds. Very rarely do I do a 1-day refeed. And they're very manual refeeds. Like, that's why I do like 2 check-ins a week or 3 check-ins a week during preps, and then eventually daily for peak weeks. Peak week, I like this question because the answer is it depends on the person and the circumstances. And this is the answer that people don't want. And this is why peaking is artwork. If I think someone is going to have a blown out gut and I need an entire day to give the digestive system a break before they're on stage, guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to load them down up until a Thursday, and I'm going to give their gut a complete chance to get a break on a Friday. And then they're going to step on stage on a Saturday. If the person doesn't retain a lot of water, well, guess what I'm going to do? They're probably not going to get water reduction on the day of the show, and I'm going to linear load them throughout the week, and I'm going to figure out where their best look is on stage. And if I hit that best look where I think that there is no more room to squeeze out of this physique, I'm going to reverse that timetable to when they are on stage and put them on stage as a day in the life. Almost every single athlete that I have steps on stage as a day in the life because they already know what they're doing on that given day. When it comes to water depletion, the last athlete that I just turned pro drank 2 gallons of water on the day of the show. The last pro I had on stage at the Toronto Pro that was just 7th place, just outside of 6th place, drank 2 gallons of water on the day of the show, and he had a 2-hour workout before he stepped on the stage. Why? He looked better at the gym. Why am I going to change anything? If he's dry and grainy at the gym, so I haven't really had to do crazy peaks at this season. So besides Damien, Damien's a different situation. So Damien Patrick, who is 6th at the Arnold, he has crazy peaks. Because I had to peel back like 4 to 6 pounds off of him to make weight. And then I had to start refeeding him again to get him back up, right? But then it's like the point of diminishing return. It's like, how much fluid do you reintroduce immediately after weigh-ins? Which the first thing I do is replenish fluid and electrolyte intake. And if you want to get into more complexity, we can talk about potassium intake and sodium intake and water intake. But that's a whole topic of conversation that is going to lose people really quickly. But really, what I would like in a perfect world situation, I'd like to just feed someone up into the show. Hopefully the carbs drop down the cortisol levels, reduces down angiotensin, and I can let them step on stage without any manipulation at all.
Are you ever cutting water?
Yes, sometimes. With Damien, I do reduce down water. I don't cut water ever 100% though. Ever.
Okay. And what is the reason?
Because the fluid is everything. Fluid's going to help with shuttling of nutrients. You need with water comes sodium to get skeletal glycogen into the tissue.
No, I mean, what would be the reason for the reduction in water rather than keeping it the same?
Oh, so it's the catch-22 always, right? If I'm pulling down fluid, I know I'm going to be reducing down how full their muscle tissue is. It doesn't matter how much food I'm giving that person. Water is going to create a lot more volume in a muscle tissue than food will do ever. So if I reduce on fluid, I know that I'm going to be quote-unquote making them flatter. However, if they retain water in a certain spot where I think they can lose on, let's say their lower back, that's probably the most common one. If they're going to be retaining water in their lower back and I need to reduce down the water in the lower back, there's going to be that point of diminishing return with how much fluid do I need to pull out. Once I get the fluid out, hold the look. And then I hold the look. And then holding the look is different for everyone. Then it takes into excretion rate. Are they excreting out 6 ounces of water per hour, 8 ounces of water per hour, 12 ounces of water per hour? Some people excrete very quickly, especially with stimulant use going to shows. So I try to measure out how much fluid they're taking out. And then I just match the fluid intake. And then I just keep them steady because then I don't really have another variable to have to manipulate.
So as they're excreting, they're peeing a lot, you're trying to reconsume that same amount of water to hold that look. I think this is what you think people fuck this up a lot with diuretics is they just use it and then they start excreting all this amount and they're not replenishing that water intake and then they get super flat.
Yeah, and everyone thinks that it's like, oh yeah, you could have been drier. It's like, no, your muscle tissue was flat. That's why you don't look dry, because the muscle tissue wasn't pressing against the skin. Yeah, so yeah. It has nothing to do with being drier. The other issue with pharmaceutical or diuretics that people don't talk about is kidney stones and damage to the kidneys over time. So it uptakes calcium in the kidneys, especially when you have water being stopped. So kidney stones are a very real thing when it comes to diuretic use. Now, diuretics have a time and a place. Like, I would be lying if I didn't say that. Now, do I use diuretics? No, I haven't used one all season. I probably, hopefully, won't use one going forward, right? I've used 3/4 of a diazide in the last 3.5 years of coaching. And you know what happened when I used the diazide? I just had to give them more water. So, and it's a system, so it's a loop. Like, you're taking a diuretic, you're increasing circulation. So guess what happens when you upregulate the circulation? Well, you need more water. When you're increasing the water intake, you're also flushing out sodium. So you're going to be drying out actually from the reduction of the sodium. It has nothing to do with actually the water being pushed out of the system. The water getting pushed out of the system is pulling the sodium out of the system. So that's really where you're actually drying out, is the upregulation of the circulation and the flushing of the sodium.
Okay, so you're replenishing sodium too.
Yes, you have to replenish sodium. Sodium, you're going to go flat from sodium. If you reduce down water, you have to match sodium. Like, usually you have to increase sodium.
Mm-hmm. Do you ever see those guys like drinking, like pounding Gatorades and stuff backstage?
Yeah.
How do you feel about that? That makes sense to you?
So pounding, I think you missed the mark if you have to pound anything backstage.
Yeah.
Like a rice cake is not going to make you from first or second place. It's going to probably be fluid first off. So if needed, if you're going flat, it's usually due to lack of sodium and fluid. So Gatorade is probably a pretty solid choice. In fact, I'll use like, me personally, I just use like coconut water, and then I'll moderate the sodium myself. Because when you're increasing that sodium intake, again, if the whole point to you reducing down water was to get sodium out of the body, and you give the person water and you're giving the person a bunch of sodium also, they're going to retain it, right? So it's like, put the water in, see how much sodium is needed. You can always add the sodium in, put it on a rice cake and nut butter or something like that, right? Like, the food's really not doing that much at that point, right? Like, you should already be loaded down by the time you're even going on to the day of show. Like, and realistically, your feet are up on a Friday and you're relaxing, and you can literally load up on a Thursday and then be loaded all the way down until the end of day on a Saturday, if really needed.
Mm-hmm. Now, with training, you said you had a guy that was training 2 hours right before a show, right? So, you know, do you typically, you try to keep everything, I'm sure, like all variables the same, training the same, or do you ever like reduce training prior to a show? You know, some guys, completely back off.
Yeah, so I will definitely cut off legs. Not physically cut them off, you guys. Like I'll cut off leg training. Usually about a week out from a show, sometimes 2 weeks out from a show, depending on the person, to start reducing that inflammation. And plus, they get to push harder on cardio for the final last week up into the peak week on the cardio, because their legs are actually recovering. Unless you're not really accomplishing much besides damage at that point, usually. When it comes to training in peak week, most people are not training on Friday, and most people are not training on Saturday. When I treat the pump up backstage on that Saturday, the day of show, I'll have them pumping backstage in pulses as if they're working out, so that if they start to go flat, I know it ahead of time, like especially with the reduction of water, right? If water fluid is reduced, then I know eventually they're going to go flat from pumping out too much fluid out of their system. So then I can always reintroduce fluid before they're going to stage, so that they get better on stage rather than worse on stage.
Yeah, that makes sense. The issue that could be with that is that, like, at some shows, it's almost like super fucking hard to pump up.
Yep.
So
that's another thing. Like I'd rather them be able to be backstage like an hour ahead of time, and like worst comes to worst, if they have enough fluid in their system, and I can also reintroduce fluid, I'll have them start pumping up an hour before they're going on stage. Even if it's only like, hey, pump up for a minute and then relax for 5 minutes. Pump up for a minute. And like minimum, you're going to have at least some of that glycogen that you had stored up and blood flow pushing through your system. You might even get a poop out, because you're getting like the circulation of like fluid through your system again, right?
Yeah. Do you ever use insulin prior to pumping up, prior to going on stage?
2 IUs if needed.
Yeah, makes sense. Like, how do you I was gonna say, how do you feel about the use of insulin prior to fasted cardio? Have you ever heard of that?
So I could see 2 IUs of insulin without
a small amount.
Yeah, with carnitine to shuttle the carnitine into the tissue, being utilized. Anything more than that, I don't see a point to it. Like, what are you trying to accomplish? Like, when you're taking growth hormone, you're not trying to get like growth factor ways out of it. If you're using it for lipase release, the growth hormone's already going to release lipase, which helps you with the fat oxidation. So I don't really see the purpose to it, unless if it's literally the use with L-carnitine for the shuttling.
Mm-hmm. Do you typically have a lot of people stick to fasted cardio? Do you prefer that, or does it not matter?
No, most people do better with that. It's funny. Most people do better with fasted cardio. If you're using growth hormone and things like yohimbine, it does make a difference. Now, it's even if it's only 1%, like you said, even if it's only 1%, I will take my 1% all day, because when you're talking about percentages, everything matters. Now, I will say, like, for certain people, right, they have been fine without fasted cardio. Sometimes they'll do steps in a day kind of thing. And some people do great with that. But if it's someone that needs a regimen in life and they can do fasted cardio, I do usually prefer fasted cardio. For someone that's literally going to get no sleep in a day if they do fasted cardio, it's way more detrimental for them to do fasted cardio just because of lack of sleep, right? Like, sleep is everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, yep.
Yeah. I always have to reiterate that, because you already know every time I say it, somebody's going to say it doesn't matter. And, you know, it's just always funny, because it's like, okay, well, if you disagree with me, you're also disagreeing with basically every coach in bodybuilding and every bodybuilder. So I guess you could say that. But yeah, I don't have a lot of use with insulin. I used to use insulin in I haven't talked about this in my off-season phases, just because I have never had a big appetite. So I would literally take like 5 IUs after, like, an hour after eating, just to drive blood glucose down lower. So then within the next hour or so, I'd be hungry and it'd be easier for me to eat again. So I wouldn't even really be using it for like an anabolic process, but just to be able to eat more.
So interesting that you said that. The last 2 actually growing phases, the biggest I ever was, and I wish I started using insulin sooner. My biggest mistake in bodybuilding career was not utilizing insulin sooner, because I was eating between 7,000 to 8,000 calories per day in the off season. That was all clean food. That was normal. In fact, Matt and John both said that they've never had an athlete eat more than me. Like, I was over 1,000 grams of carbs a day, and this was without the use of insulin. And my blood glucose would stay in this like low 70s, sometimes even the 60s. I would see. However, I know, crazy, right? So that was when I was younger, but I wish I could have saved my pancreas a lot of despair, probably, if I started implementing insulin sooner. Plus, it also would have helped me with appetite. So my final 2 growing phases, I did utilize small doses of insulin to actually help with appetite. It also helps to put blood into the intestines. It's very well documented that it helps with actually the motility of the gut. So I utilized it actually for the motility of the gut more than anything else. And it doesn't take a lot of insulin to do that. I would usually, at the end, I would use like a small dose of a basal insulin between like 10 to 20 IUs in a day, just so I had a steady release. And then if usually pre-workout, I would do a rapid. But in my bodybuilding career, the most beneficial way of utilizing insulin was between 4 to 6 IUs pre-workout. And I would just get a better lift. I would never drop reps in reserve. So that, like, I mean, for all the science-based educators out there, reps in reserve. So I would literally, like, I would go from, my number was always like the 3 sets, right? And 10 reps. So if I got above 12, I would increase my weight. So I would do 10, 10, 10. And I was like, what the heck? Like, I didn't drop a rep in reserve. I was like, all right, like, whatever. So the last set I would always do failure. And it'd be like 10, 10, 13. I'm like, that's crazy. Okay, whatever. Went back to the gym again. It wasn't a fluke. And then it was like, I went up in weight and it was like 10, 10, 13. I'm like, what the heck is going on? Now, there was a cap out point where that did stop happening, but I would hardly drop reps in reserve when I was utilizing insulin as a pre-workout.
So you're saying it basically, made you stronger and helped with your performance in the gym?
Yep. Nothing else helped better than insulin. Insulin is the best performance enhancing drug ever made. It's also the best peptide ever made. It keeps someone alive or dead.
Yeah. It goes, that point just goes back to the same thing that we always keep saying, is that it's not just about calories and macros. It's about having the nutrients do their job the most efficiently to, help you achieve the goal that you want. And you don't need insulin to do that, right? You could design a protocol so that you have better nutrient absorption at that time pre-workout. You can, use glucose disposal agents too. Obviously not gonna be as good as insulin, but all these things matter. It's not like I could just fucking push all my carbs off till later and like that's not good. It's gonna be the same thing. No, it's fucking not. It's not. Like all this shit matters. It has a point for being in a protocol, but people who wanna learn, they'll learn. People who don't, they won't. But we've been on here for a while. I do want to get you back on. I want to talk more about like digestive health and stuff like that because we didn't even really get into any of that.
Yeah, bro. We can definitely do like an entire gastrointestinal podcast. We can do a functional health podcast where we talk about lab work and blending medical and functional health together. But yeah, gastrointestinal health is a big one for me because that's actually what took me out of my bodybuilding career. I would get like lockjaw. Every 2 bites of food I would take, it was like depressing. I was in front of these bikini athletes, and I'd have like a burger. It was just a normal meal for me. And I'd take a bite, and then I'd be into my second bite, and I'd get lockjaw. My body would literally stop me from eating food because my bacterial overgrowth got so bad. And until I fixed it, nothing got better.
Lockjaw's crazy. You had that TMJ?
TMJ, yep.
Yeah, I wrote a paper on TMJ in 8th grade because I got TMJ from smoking out of aluminum foil when I was 14 was smoking weed out of aluminum.
Oh my God. Yeah, you smoked weed out of anything back in the day.
Yeah, a little apple, little fucking
apple.
Yeah, those are when days were simpler and Rich Piana was around. But, yeah, man, I'll definitely get you back on. It was great talking to you today. Anything you want to plug? Anything you want to add on here?
No, I know that you're giving me the opportunity for a shameless plug, but I have a lot of like open bodybuilding advice on my YouTube channel, which I never promote, even on my Instagram and stuff like that. I actually do have a TikTok, which my TikTok, I don't know how it turned into it, but it's like a drug channel only. Like all around PEDs, like, and people are like, yeah, you're the best PED educator on here, whatever. But it's I actually talked about androgen receptor, actually, ironically enough, on there because someone was asking me about it. But I just talked about like the more like basic stuff. So yeah, Dynamite D is my Instagram tag. If you guys are interested, I do have an entire coaching team and stuff like that. You guys are more than welcome to hit me up. I do give free advice and I don't charge for it either. That's my biggest thing is I want to give free education to everyone. That's why I started the YouTube channel when John passed away, actually. Yeah,
that's why we have the podcast here. So help people learn. So hopefully you guys learn something because if you're not, then why the fuck am I doing this? But thanks for coming on and hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Make sure you like the video, make sure you subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you on the next episode of Brass Tack Bodybuilding.